Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Eating at a Meeting. And I am so excited to be here with you today. It is Climate Week in New York, and so I'm excited to introduce you to Anya Doherty, who is the founder and managing director of Foodsteps. It is a food sustainability platform that provides data and insights for the food industry to accurately measure, reduce, and report their environmental impact. And she's coming to us from England. I don't know where exactly you are in England.
London.
London. Okay. Okay. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, true pleasure and honor to be here, and really looking forward to talking about all things food and sustainability with you.
Yeah, I am. One of the things that I was thinking about when I was writing my prepping for this is 2015. I went to the World's Fair in Milan, and because it was all about food, and the first exhibit that you walk in was all about food waste. And I mean, and that really kind of came home and changed. I came home with that and really changed my perspective of that. But you, and I don't know what year it was or whatever, but you were at Cambridge and you were doing research on sustainability and it's the conducted research at the University of Cambridge on the environmental impact of food supply. It's the largest scientific study into the carbon labeling of food. Is that right?
Yeah, so I guess, a bit of background on that. So yes. I've always been very passionate about sustainability. That was what I knew I wanted to go into, but I actually started studying biochemistry because I was very interested in renewable fuels and energy. And I kind of took a random class in my second year, which was about kind of systems ecology. And I had an amazing lecture by a professor who was setting up this research group on food and sustainability. And I mean, maybe that Milan moment for you, I just kind of sat down and was like, oh, wow, this is a really significant problem. And at least at Cambridge at the time, it was kind of quite a nascent area of research. So this was a professor kind of, there were some groups there, but really kind of setting up a new group to focus specifically on that problem. So I ended up changing my course of studies and got really into that, and then joined the research team when I graduated, and spent an amazing kind of year with that early group forming some of the start of the research that we did. And as you mentioned, we did what was at the time the largest research study on the effects of carbon labeling food. So we put a bunch of carbon labels in various eating contexts and saw how they affected people's behavior. And the short answer, to kind of cut to the chase, is they do a bit, but not enough to really move the dial in terms of getting us towards a more sustainable food system as a whole. Not that surprising. I think we see similar things with nutrition labeling. There have been calories on food for decades, but we've still seen issues around nutrition and health related to food. So long story short, that was very much my kind of introduction to the space. But while labeling isn't, I believe, the solution to solve this, it's maybe a piece of the puzzle. It really got me kind of fully involved in this area around measuring the impact of food and how we can actually have a real impact and reduce the average carbon emissions, cost of nature, water use, of the food that we eat.
And that rolled into you starting Foodsteps.
Exactly. So I was very much kind of quite head in the data. I've always been a numbers person and absolutely loved kind of understanding for myself. It was fascinating when I was kind of reading a lot of this research around, what's the impact of, I don't know, carrots versus beans versus beef, shrimp. It's you can kind of picture it. And I was getting really into the data, and I kind of had this moment sort of thinking, well, where is this out in the world? Why am I only just learning about this now? And do food companies know this? And as I was kind of going through that process, I realized that actually this research was quite new at the time. So the research had been going on for many decades, but it had sort of reached a point where there was a high enough concentration of it to start to draw out these really big themes where we could really, for the first time, say, like, definitively, the impact of animal products is on average higher than the impact of plant-based products. And those kind of trends that, maybe had seemed obvious before, but you do need a higher concentration of data to make these, claims. So yeah, long story short, I kind of realized that data was becoming more, I guess, known in the academic sphere, but was still very kind of absent, I suppose, in the food companies. None of them knew this, and yet they were all talking about their sustainability goals and targets and whatnot. I had the chance to work with actually Cambridge University themselves first and their food. So I did a big impact assessment of everything that they serve. And then I started Foodsteps from there.
That's so interesting. And well, and actually a friend of mine, Natalie, posted on LinkedIn this morning or the other day. I need to go find this. And they did they calculated the carbon footprint of wine that was served at the event. And it was data crunching, right? She's like, okay, we just put all of the wine in one category kind of thing. And I need to go. I hope to see her soon and to talk to her about it more. But it really, tell us what goes into calculating the carbon footprint of a food or a wine, or how do you even figure that out?
It's a great question. So this kind of comes back to my point about there needing to be like a high enough concentration of data over a period of time, because kind of the easiest thing to do, and probably what your friend did, would be, okay, let's say that they bought this wine was from, I don't know, France or South Africa. There will be published data in academic studies and also scientific databases. Will basically be studies that people have done over many years looking at the impact of carbon impact of French wine. So it's probably lots of people who have gone out and they'll have measured in vineyards in France how much fertilizer is used on those, what is the energy cost of moving it around, transporting it, bottling it, all of that. And then you can kind of take that data and say, okay, well, I'm buying a wine from France, so this is probably what the impact of my wine is based on these data points. Now, that works in general for lots of foods, because there's quite a lot of data on this now around the world. But what's really interesting is you can also do your own studies. So if you know exactly which vineyard this wine is being bought from in France, you can, in theory, go and work with that farmer producer and actually gather the data yourself from that vineyard. So you could measure, okay, on a cycle, how much fertilizer are they using, how many pesticides, what's the actual benefits, and then you could build your own study. And at Foodsteps, we do both things. So we kind of use a lot of the average data where it's cheaper, it's more cost effective, you can kind of get the answers quite quickly. And then we do a lot of that deeper dive data as well, where we actually go back in the supply chain. We work with producers, farmers, transporters, and we're kind of gathering that data itself and building our own studies, which is fun as well.
Yeah, because it's not just, because you just said the transporters and it's even like it's coming from the farm, and all those steps in between the farm to the plate.
Exactly.
There's so much to think about.
Exactly. And for some products, honestly, it's not really possible, because if you think about especially highly processed products, they might have 50 or 60 ingredients, all of which are coming from different places. They all go through unique processing steps, and then they get reprocessed and repackaged. And I mean, you could do it, but it's not it's not really possible. A lot of the cases where we are measuring that data ourselves at this stage tend to be simpler products. So things like wheat or beef or beer or coffee. We've done studies on all of those items. And that is, they're simple supply chains where you've maybe got 2 or 3 actors. It's the producer, they send it to a processor, they then send it to a distributor, maybe to a retailer. And those ones are really fun, especially where they can trace it back to the exact production location. Because we can then gather data from that supply chain. It takes a lot of time, and at the moment it's not hugely scalable, but that is something we're working on as well.
Well, and the fact, hugely processed foods, right? Because I try to limit my, when I'm buying a prepackaged, highly processed food, is like limit it to 9 ingredients or less, right? Because then that there's fewer inputs to that. But again, I don't know. And then we were talking before the show, natural flavors, who knows where all those come from. right. But so, and it really helps then to think through that using more whole foods in serving our menu items and into measuring that carbon footprint. Um, what was the biggest surprise have you had, like, in doing some of these with your clients that you found?
Yeah, there are always surprises, I think, especially in food, because I think, well, I mean, firstly, at least when I started this, I had the impression that you could go back and find out where food comes from. And it's quite shocking when you realize, oh, wow, like you really can't. And, you know, we work with some really well-known brands that, I don't know, say they're serving a spaghetti bolognese. You would
Mm-hmm.
think they know what's in that bolognese, and they can't even tell you because they bought it from someone else who, you know, it's
Yeah.
very strange, I think.
It
But
wasn't
yeah,
made by grandma from scratch. Right.
sadly
Yeah.
not. I think, you know, that would be very nice. I think we're past that world now. But yeah, some of the big surprises have been, I guess, yeah, one that was really interesting. So we did this kind of deep dive back into a fish supply chain with a company.
Mm-hmm.
And they were buying fish from Vietnam, which is quite common in the UK for some forms of farmed fish. And we went a step further and actually we're looking into the feed that was going into this fish supply chain, because the fish, yeah, they get fed. And we, yeah, you know, the meal included rice and soy, which were not very surprising. But then when we looked into the soy, that was coming from a kind of undisclosed location in South America, and we actually just couldn't verify where that was coming from. And that represents quite a big deforestation risk in the supply chain for that fish. So, you know, this is a company that is very widely used in the UK from a consumer perspective. I think most people would really not assume that the fish they were eating could be contributing to deforestation in South
Mm-hmm.
America, but these are really the realities of the food system that we have built, and also the lack of transparency that I think most people would be very shocked to, yeah, learn
Mm-hmm.
about that. Probably wouldn't imagine that at all when they're sitting down for dinner.
Well, that's so much to unpack. I mean, because
Yeah.
wow, that's a lot to think about. And going back to what you said at the beginning too about the labeling, and that you all realized in your study that putting that information on the label really didn't impact people's choices, right?
Yeah.
It's more of having, we could probably say that with a lot of things going on right now, just sitting down and having a conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And learning that, because you're not going to necessarily get that from a label.
Yeah.
But how do we, and I'm going to jump into the conversation that we were having beforehand, as before we went live, and because you do work, some of your clients are in food service and
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say mass produced food service, but large food service, scaling
Mm-hmm.
large food service. So you can have a bigger impact with them. I liked that analogy because I thought, hey, XYZ company has this many hotels, this many convention centers across the country, and they have to buy into that corporate buying program. But you said to me, but it's actually easier to change because we can say, hey, corporate buying program, this is the butter to buy, or this is the beef to buy because it has a lower carbon footprint, and then push that out to your
Yeah.
franchisees. Yeah.
Exactly. I think, I mean, this comes to the question of kind of how do we affect change across the system? And
Right.
I think that, in an ideal world, we would all be kind of, people who saw information and kind of made decisions that probably in the moment, align with our truest values. That can be very hard when we're also faced with things like, cost and other factors that really do impact people more. So yeah, what we were kind of discussing was like, how do you affect change in the system? And it's actually very hard to change consumer behavior on a bigger scale. You need lots of interventions. A lot of the nudges, they do work, but they can be more kind of 5, 10, 15% range. So what we were kind of discussing was around, I guess, that B2B model, which is what we do at Foodsteps. So we work with a lot of large food companies. And while that has its challenges and limitations that I'm sure we can get to shortly. One of the benefits is that often you have a single decision maker in those businesses who's actually responsible for a huge, kind of pyramid, if you like, of kind of effect. So if they change one thing, like change the way they source the butter or decide to use less butter in a dish, that might affect tens of millions or hundreds of millions of meals in one decision.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to do that from a kind of population level effect is really challenging. So I think it's about kind of thinking about where in the system you can make those changes, and ultimately we need it from lots of angles, but that's one of the angles that we go for at Foodsteps, is that B2B, working with food businesses, finding those key decision makers, and hopefully having a big effect. Because back to my previous example, like if we can decide or help to educate one person in a food business who's buying that fish from Vietnam, that's a big risk from a deforestation perspective, they can choose to make that change and affect all of the fish that company buy and sell and serve to people. And that's one way to make change in the system.
Well, and then I said too, is like, hey, making that change, then you've got to communicate it down the whole path of, when it gets to that plate, right? Because there's so many decisions being made, especially in the events world, that buyer's buying it for, I'm just going to say all of Hyatt, right? And how do the communication needs to be spread down, saying, hey, this is why we're buying this specific butter or this specific thing. All right, somebody just put on here. Let's see what they have to say. So fascinating. I'm really interested to understand the push-pull dynamics here, if possible. Whether businesses are proactively looking to improve their green credentials to enhance their brand, or whether they must meet certain standards as enforced by XYZ policy body. Both, neither. Understanding environmental impact is such an important work, but it can be a high effect. So just wondering about prioritization in your customers' minds.
This is such a great question. So my thoughts on this are that, like with many things in the world, you'll see a big spread, so there are some businesses who really are looking to do this proactively, and that may be, often it probably is from a selfish perspective to improve their own green credentials and their brand. And there's, and that probably is the minority. Let's say it's kind of 5%, maybe 10% if we're being generous. The remainder are not going to do this work until there is regulation and there's a higher cost to them of not doing it. But I do think that 5 to 10% are extremely crucial in showing that there is a pathway to do this, and ultimately influencing the policy that will then apply to the remaining 90 to 95%. Because policymakers and our experience of engaging with them are incredibly cautious. Like, they will not put out regulation until they can see that there is traction within, the business community and examples of how this can be achieved. So that 5 to 10% that are kind of putting their heads out and doing it first, they are the ones who, are kind of, I think, paving the way for what we really need, which is regulation in the space, because the vast majority will not do this until there's a higher cost of business without it, if that makes sense.
Totally. And I have the same feeling on food allergy labeling, right? In understanding that, and with a lot. And I did log on to LinkedIn. So I did see that was Rosie. So Rosie, thank you so much for that question. And it really does, with all of this, I'm like, do you do it because it's good business, or do you do it because it's good for the environment, or do you do it because, I want you to do it for both of those reasons, but I also want you to, I don't really want to force regulation down on you, but that's kind of the only way it will happen. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I think, from what I've seen, you have individuals definitely within businesses who are doing it for environmental reasons. I think that as much as we like to maybe think this is possible, I think businesses are structured in such a way that they act in their own interests. So they are doing it because they think it's good for their business. We don't need to get into like a wider philosophical debate about that, but I guess that should be our expectation. And I guess it's kind of, how do we work with that to then, ultimately, I think, get to the place that we all want to get to, which is having good regulation here, because the whole space won't move until that happens.
Right. And then how do you, I think in New York right now, because it's Climate Week, there's a variety of people from all across the globe. They're having these conversations, right? how do you do that across nations, right? And how do you do that within one country, and then first of all, and then across the nation or even a continent, and then across the globe? Get everybody to think not the same way, but to see the greater good of that.
Yeah, that is a real challenge. It's definitely one that I think is quite an interesting question from the UK perspective now, because obviously we're no longer within the EU. And so from a policy perspective, there's been a real, I guess, kind of, push and pull between, do we align to the EU? Do we try and kind of do our own thing? Where does that lead us in relation to, other trade deals and things that the government's trying to push forward? I think there have been some good channels, I think, here, in terms of engaging with the EU, but also, I guess, a recognition that the UK maybe wants to take its own path a bit. And in some ways that is, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing, at least at this early stage, like the way the UK is kind of forming some approaches to measuring the environmental impact of food are seeming quite different from the EU, but some of them I do think could be better. And maybe there is an opportunity for, kind of co-learning there. But I don't know if I've got the answer to how we sort of create an international.
I don't think anybody has that answer.
I would agree that it's that would be a dream world where we really can come together and
Right. All right. And Andrew, you just piped in here. How do you see the conversation around reporting on nature risk supporting the GHGE carbon agenda? And can you coming from me, can you please explain out what the GHGE/carbon agenda is?
That's the greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
Carbon agenda. So I think just talking generally about greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm to be honest, I'm less familiar on the reporting around nature risks, but it is something I'd like to learn more about. I do think that seems to have been relatively effective more from a kind of financial institution perspective. And I would say in general, this space should wholly be learning from itself. Maybe an area where I don't know if we can get audience members to come in and share things, but
if you want to come in here, Andrea, let me know. Just shoot me a message and I will send you the link if you want to join in here and talk about that. But one of the things that you that I read about you and what I've heard you say a couple of times is that food systems is one of the biggest levers for tackling climate change and the loss of nature, which kind of ties into Andrea's thing. Mm-hmm. Can you explain, that and why you think this is overlooked by so many people, or it's just getting its, footing?
Yeah, great question. So I do think, just to kind of go back to the loss of nature point, personally, I think this is, I don't know, we've got to beat the drum of this way louder than we are at the moment. I think people have started to get the food and climate link, and also, climate has generally been higher up the agenda, at least from where I'm seeing things, compared to the nature risk. But I think the sort of crash in wildlife that we have seen literally in my lifetime and my parents' lifetime is like so astounding, and I feel like we have not in any way grasped that or the importance of food in that. So just to kind of share like the things that have moved me in that kind of side of things before I get onto the link with food. I was reading this study which really just kind of resonated with my personal experience. So in the UK, apparently between 2003 and 2024, there's been a 60% decline in the number of flying insects hitting windscreens, which is really interesting because I was thinking that recently when I was driving. I was like, I remember there being way more insects that used to hit our windscreens.
I had the same thought 2 days ago. Yes.
No way. Okay. Yes. So I'm sure in the US it's got to be the same, but that is so astounding because a 60% decline is seriously concerning, and insects are absolutely the bedrock of our whole kind of animal ecosystem. And on top of that, since 1970, I think there's been about a 70% decline in just the total wildlife populations in the world, which is again just totally astounding. So I do just want to kind of put a plug out there that we talk about climate, but I really think we should be talking a lot more about the wildlife crash, loss of nature, this is kind of really, really important. And then, to go back to the link with food, I mean, food is it's one of the biggest drivers of habitat loss. 70 to 80% of habitat loss is due to, basically expansion of cropland. And that itself is one of the top 3 drivers of, biodiversity loss.
Mm-hmm.
Food, we've got all of our pesticides. We're dumping like tons of chemicals on the land all the time, which are literally toxic to life. So why are we that surprised that it's killing life? And food is, about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions. And the confluence of all of these things, like we're losing habitat, we're pouring chemicals on the land that kill life, and we're changing the climate, and all of those things together, plus some others, are totally, I don't know, they're just, magnifying themselves. And I think we should really see the food system as, I guess the key contributor to that, but then also the area where we should focus our efforts on, actually righting this problem.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and you don't think about it, when you're clearing land, and actually where I live right now, they're clearing land to widen the road and make it a highway. Mm-hmm. So we've got lots of deers and all these animals moving in. We've had them, but I think they're more populated because they're losing their land where the forests where they were, right? Moving into the neighborhoods a lot. All right. So Andrea, go ahead.
Yes, I really want to agree with Andrea here. So okay. Absolutely love this point. I think, part of the backlash that we're seeing against climate, while I think we really, really need to fight that and make sure that we're always putting science at the heart of, the discussions that we're having, I think that it is a really difficult thing to communicate, right? Because who intrinsically cared about carbon dioxide before they were told that it was impacting the climate and then could impact, your livelihood? I don't think instinctually we kind of, as humans, know that there's a value to carbon dioxide. That's something we've had to learn, and that's important. We should really work on educating ourselves and others, and focusing on science. But one of the real, I guess, kind of opportunities with the nature crisis is that I think we do feel intrinsically connected to nature. People, have their own direct experiences with that. It really tangibly impacts your day-to-day life. Like, I remember seeing more insects, I remember there being more songbirds, like these types of things. And it's also, I think, much more emotive and can really connect to people's culture, their heritage, their kind of sense of belonging in places. Andrea is definitely right that one of the real challenges is it's so hard to measure nature, whereas greenhouse gas emissions have kind of the opposite problem. But I do think that this is really a space where there's a lot more opportunity, but also a really urgent need to, kind of bring this to life, because we might be really running out of time. Like a 70% decline since 1970. To me, my brain goes, okay, well, that can't be that long until 100%, because there's not that much time. Like so it's something definitely we're looking at working on more within Foodsteps, is this link to biodiversity. And do we even call it biodiversity? Because does that kind of sound too, I don't know, dry? Maybe, wildlife crash or nature crisis. I don't know. We're thinking about the words that we can use as well to try and bring this to life.
Right. Well, because you're trying to change consumers' minds, businesses' minds, and consumers' minds. But yes, we as consumers are buying a lot of the food, but the people who are making the food are buying all these products, and they're the ones that are, quote unquote, doing the damage at the same time, right? I want to read out this thing that Andrea said. I would love to see a menu which takes a nature agenda and reports on the impact on nature in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions. Now that I know what that acronym is, I know the data is still challenging much more than the greenhouse gas emissions, but I would love to see someone trying. I love that idea. And so I would love to see it from you. That would be great, as adding that into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, back to the original part of the discussion, there's the team who's still in Cambridge working on this. They have just started doing some really, well, actually they're quite far down the line, doing some really wonderful research on how we can link directly food products to nature impact. So like we have data on the carbon emissions of carrots and beans and beef and that. They're just publishing papers on how we can do the equivalent for nature. So yeah, we're really looking forward to hopefully being able to bring that to life more in the sort of food industry in the same way that we've tried to do that with carbon initially.
And she said, well, and without many species, we won't produce food right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And actually, I saw somebody say the other day, like, do we really need bees? And I don't know if it was a joke because she just put stars around her, really. But I'm like, we do need bees, right? We need all these insects.
Exactly. Yeah, and a lot of flying insects that are not bees are also really important pollinators as well. So
yes,
we need that. I think we need the diversity, but we also need the abundance. And I think the abundance is something I feel we've not really come to terms with, the fact that we've actually lost, in a lot of cases, over half the abundance of these populations. Like, that's a really big deal. It should really be reflecting on that.
Well, and just tying back to that and saying that why I was thinking about this, I drove back and forth to Raleigh the other day, which is a 2-hour drive, and I noticed that there were dead bugs on my thing. But I remember driving to Florida probably 15 years ago, and I posted something on Facebook. I'm like, all these insects killed themselves on my windshield. This is so annoying, right? But then now it's like 1/10 of that.
No, it's really noticeable. I feel it in my own life. I remember when we used to drive to my grandparents' house, that, as a kid, that was kind of something it was just an entertainment thing. I had that thought myself. I was like, has this changed, or is that just my imagination? Then I looked it up and I was like, no, there's been a 60% decline in the UK, literally in not even my full lifetime. So very concerning.
That is very concerning. So what are the key challenges? I think we've talked about it a little bit, for companies to reduce their emissions today. I'm like, and what can they do to drive that action? I mean, because getting the full length of where all the food comes from that's probably one of them, right?
Yeah, I think access to the data really is one of the key challenges, and that is what we try to work with companies to solve. So I would even say, taking a step back from kind of going all the way down the supply chain, like even having at a food item by food item level understanding of what their impact might be on an average basis is still a big step for companies. So currently, if you're a food company, you might be trying to understand the environmental impact of your food, and you might even just be doing that at a very high level. So you might have like put all of your meat items into one category, all of your dairy items into another category, all of your fish into another category. And that's okay because it gives you a very high level understanding. But, you want to do that. Some of the food companies we work with have, 100,000 different products that they sell. So what we try and do is go to that level below and say, okay, we're going to tell you the impact of your beef versus your pork chops versus your salmon versus your pollock, and kind of giving that level of detail. So that is kind of, one of the challenges is just having access to the data at the right level to make decisions. And even going a level deeper, we work with companies who, manufacturing or selling really complex items that might have 15, 40, 50 ingredients in them. So we're even going a level deeper to say, okay, well, within this lasagna or within this sandwich, what are the impacts of the items within that? And can you then use that to kind of reformulate those items? So that's kind of challenge number one. And then obviously it gets more and more challenging the more you try and kind of go back into the supply chain and get more data. But I do think those challenges are quite solvable. They just need companies to work with the right data partner, etc. The second challenge that I really think exists, and I also feel like it's something that's not talked about enough, is kind of going back to the point that someone made earlier in the questions. It's like, it is currently more costly to try and do the sustainable thing as a food business than it is to do the unsustainable thing. If it was more cost effective to do the sustainable thing, we would not be here having this conversation.
Right.
And so the biggest challenge is like, we need to put those cost barriers in place for ourselves, and that the only way to do that, I believe, is through regulation, because regulation is the thing that makes it more costly to not comply than it is to comply. It's as simple as that. And I believe that until we have those cost barriers in place and it continues to be cheaper and easier to sell food that is unsustainable, we're just going to be flogging a dead horse trying to solve a problem that just, the crux is, they're businesses, they're there to make a profit. We can debate, the philosophy behind that. That is the system we have. Therefore, it needs to be more expensive to sell food that is less sustainable. That's just the solution to the problem. But the problem is that regulation, especially in today's political climate, is really not kind of forthcoming. So I actually believe that food companies, it's in their interest to have a level playing field and to actually kind of push for this regulation that will make it the same cost to all companies to comply. And so that's the work that I'm quite excited to start doing more of, is actually advocating with these food companies who we are working with to show to the regulators and policymakers like this is possible. It's a long road, but I ultimately believe that that's the kind of area that this work needs to be influencing.
Well, and it reminds me of a study in a chapter of a book that I co-authored on. It was a food service company that worked with one of their corporate clients in their company cafeteria. And the company was trying to reduce their health insurance costs, right? And they gave everybody pedometers. They, pushed all of this thing, never talking to the food side, never talking to that company. And they finally went back to them, and they ended up reducing the cost of the healthier food. And the food that was more sugar, was not as healthy for you, costs more. And they actually got to see the change in their health insurance costs, like this, whatever they were, statins or whatever that they were measuring, and so it's kind of the same thing, right? Like, let's make what's better for the environment, what's better for us as humans, less expensive than the other. And there's a chef in the UK, I think he's in the UK, said that, he's like, why don't we just say it's a carrot, and the carrots that have the chemicals on it, saying, instead of saying this is the organic carrot, let's talk about this is a carrot and this is the unorganic carrot, right? And flipping that conversation. And somebody's like, the food manufacturers will never fly for that. But somebody put in here, so exciting, never interesting, and never thought about it like that. 50% better for British wildlife is more emotionally compelling than B-grade carbon emissions, though much harder to achieve. And then are there other countries that you know of that are leading in food regulation that could be a model for the UK?
That is a great question. I don't feel there are those that are kind of majorly, there's always interesting policies, I feel like, that come out of places like New Zealand that are often more willing to kind of try different agricultural policies and things. And I know when we left the EU, there was some look at different models like that. I think, Denmark, for example, they've done more around a kind of standardized database on the environmental impact of food that I think is being looked at from a UK perspective. But I would say, generally kind of that, some of the countries in the European Union, Denmark, Netherlands, France as well, they're at a kind of maybe like a couple of steps ahead of the UK, but none that I feel, if we sort of, took them as a gold standard, we could sort of majorly,
No, that was Rosie again. I pulled up LinkedIn to see who that was. So thank you for that question again, Rosie. Kind of going back to your data thing, is a quote that I found you saying, companies are drowning in data, but starving for insights. Businesses can get overwhelmed by reporting requirements, and so they tend to focus on compliance rather than using data to drive actual change. So that kind of looking at that regulation, that compliance thing as well, those two need to work together.
Yeah, exactly. I do think that in the absence of clear, like one of the big challenges in this space is that there is no standardization for how to measure the environmental impact of food. There's no standardization for how to report it. And we see a ton of wasted time and effort from companies who are, really kind of drowning in like this sea of uncertainty around, are we calculating this right? Are we reporting it right? There's so much uncertainty and lack of direction on that's unfortunately wasting a lot of time and means that people can't focus on the actual work itself, which is the insights and the decarbonization. So I feel like the regulation should be there to make it very clear and standardized and just take all those questions off the table about how do we do that reporting, and that can then open up the kind of energy and space to actually focus on what matters, which is using the data to drive the changes.
Right. We have standardization around so many things, like globally, right? Everybody knows what a stop sign means.
I think we will get there on carbon data. Again, it's just like, it's disappointing to see the kind of I guess political climate not be as accepting, I think, of advancing this at the pace that it needs to go. But I do think that it's probably going to reach a threshold at a certain point where it becomes probably at the point where it becomes totally chaotic, like more chaotic than it currently is, where no one can understand it anymore, and then hopefully we will all align around better ways to do this stuff.
Right. Andrea just asked, I wonder whether countries which have a higher self-sufficiency than the UK would be working on stronger standards, but that could be wrong.
Interesting. I guess kind of standards from what perspective? Like if we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions reporting and things like that, I think that is mostly being driven by how strongly countries are working on their net zero policy and I guess plans for different industries to align with that. And that has tended to be the European countries. I don't know how much that correlates with self-sufficiency. Totally like side point, but you did say you like to do side points. So
yes, I do.
More interested recently as well in kind of some of the pieces around like food safety and storage. So how much food are we actually kind of storing in case of disasters and things, and that's really interesting. There's a huge variation. I was learning that Switzerland have got food for the whole country for a certain number of days.
What? Wow.
I think Finland have got it for a crazy amount of time. I don't want to be quoted on this, but maybe like over 3 months or something, they have food for the entire country stored.
Wow.
I don't know if we have any in the UK. I'll have to find out, but it's quite interesting. So different countries kind of, sort of food security question in very different directions, it seems.
Right. Well, and food security is a huge topic of conversation globally, and how we can do that. And like, that's a lot of canning, right? Or however they're storing it. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, have to big grain stores, I think.
Alexander joined us on I'm hoping I'm saying this right, on Instagram, and I had Adia as well. So if you have any questions for Anya on Instagram, please type them in here and I will pass them on. It is it's all right. So it's Climate Week in New York. What's one message that you would like, food manufacturers, actually, let's not even go food manufacturers, but food, what are they called? Oh my gosh, catering companies, catering companies and things to understand about climate change and what they can do. And I know you've worked with some, and what can we do as meeting professionals in the hospitality side to really think through our impact on climate change and the food that we're serving?
Yeah, great question. I think so many answers to this. I do feel like one of the areas I've found most effective and really enjoyed working the most has been working with chefs and kind of some of the key decision makers who are actually crafting and innovating, and getting the data into those people's hands is often kind of where you start to drive that innovation and actually see the solutions kind of coming up. I think it's one thing to do all this analysis from a top-down kind of business perspective. It's another thing integrating it into the way that food companies work. And I'm always really inspired by what we see coming out of those sessions, and also what we're seeing in general. A lot of the really small disruptive brands, I think, are, for me at the moment, where I'm finding the most hope and kind of I guess optimism for the future is kind of just really out there ideas that people have had, and they've done that on their own back, kind of using the data and things to guide their approaches. Andrea, I actually, all of my stats and kind of interest in this came from seeing a talk that Tim Lang did specifically on that topic. So yes, it was very interesting. I'd recommend that to people. I think Tim published a report on food security and resilience. And
it was released this year. Okay, yeah, I'll go look that up myself. And Andrea also said, because if there's more food production in the country, the greenhouse gas emissions contribution to total country greenhouse gas emissions might be bigger. So that might be more pressed to find solutions. Solution-wise, because I was listening to Danny Nierenberg from Food Tank's conversations during Climate Week, and there's a chef, because you mentioned chefs, Rasmus Monk. He's the founder and head chef at The Alchemist and Spora. And the other day he was talking with Kim Severson, I think it was Kim Severson, from the New York Times, about creating proteins out of CO2. I'm like, I have no idea even, that's mind boggling. Right. But like thinking about but I appreciated the fact that he's like, yes, we could do this, but we also need to make sure that it tastes good. Right. And that people are going to buy it, but we have to find out different solutions and how to feed everybody.
Yeah. As I was saying, I'm finding a lot of optimism and excitement from those disruptors. I think there are some really amazing, really small companies. And we were talking companies with, I don't know, a handful of people in them. And we've had the privilege of working with many of them, like across beer, that's a lot lower impact. They're using renewable energy and using waste food within the beer production. We've grown more regeneratively, so a lot lower inputs on the system. That's been really interesting. Worked with a very small coffee company who were kind of really looking at their traceability and sourcing from regions with low or no deforestation. Even some meat producers who are really trying to look at how they can source feed and kind of manure production, processing, these types of things. I'm loving seeing where a lot of these kind of more, and often I think they do start small because they're small teams who kind of got a new idea, but I think they are the ones who are really actually capturing the eyes in a lot of cases of the big companies, because those companies are trying, they are trying to solution scan and be like, oh my God, we've got a major problem. And none of our suppliers, well, some of them are, but trying to see these novel techniques and things. So I'm finding a lot of inspiration and optimism from seeing those kind of solutions. And then the question is, how quickly can they scale, and do they still work at scale?
So when does it become that this is second nature, right? That's what we do, right? Versus having to put a label of this is organic, right? And even going back to like way back when we started is like changing consumers' perceptions. Like this is how we eat because it's better for the environment, versus putting all these labels on a variety of different things and trying to change consumers' minds when it's just, this is the right thing and this is how we should be eating.
Yeah, I think for me, it does go back to the regulation point, which is I just do not believe that we can have that type of system without regulation that has some guardrails on the type of food. I think maybe this is again getting like slightly philosophical, but when we think about the types of societies we want to live in, they are societies of, freedom and choice. And I think that is a very important bedrock of, the way that we live, but we also need to recognize that our choices in terms of what we eat and the food we produce has an impact on everyone else, because it's one planet that we're all living on, and whether we like it or not, what you choose to eat does impact me, and it impacts the world that I live in as well. And yes, we need to find the right balance between having that choice, which is something we all kind of have fought for, but also recognizing that there has to be guardrails and limits on that, because at the moment, we're just,
right.
Anyway, long story short, I don't think it will be second nature until we have got regulation that prevents us from doing what we're currently doing. I don't know how possible that is, that we end up in a world where we have that, but that's the world that I'm fighting for. So yeah.
All right, and one more question before we get to some rapid fire questions that I have for you. But does it? And I'm going to talk generational, and my friend David's going to kill me because I'm going to say, let's talk generations and ages and things like that. But it's more about value. He pushes the value proposition.
Yeah.
And is there a different value proposition from different generations to make keeping this from happening, or and then who's pushing it?
Yeah, I think it's really, I love, well, as soon as you said generation, like one of the things that I really think back to is just how much our diets have changed in, 2 generations. So my grandfather grew up on a tiny farm in rural Ireland. And when I ask, his brothers who are still alive about the food that they used to eat, it was like, they grew everything in their garden. They had, they, bought like their own flour just from, I don't know, the neighbors. They did all their own milling and all this type of stuff. And then they would eat, like an egg a week. And then maybe they'd have, sort of like kill a chicken or a lamb like every couple of months. And I just think from that life to 2 generations where I live in London, and there's this like insane explosion of food and cuisines from like absolutely everywhere. It's so hard to fathom like how different, that is.
Yeah, true.
But I think in terms of generational sort of, I guess, preferences, I don't know. I think it is, previously there was, research that kind of showed younger people especially were more aligning to these kind of climate values and choosing to reduce, their meat consumption, etc. I've seen a lot of that suggests it's actually maybe reversing. And at least in the UK, there have been some studies showing kind of younger people, I guess, actually, increasing their meat consumption in many instances. So I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's people that are in both, in across the board. I think it aligns more with, as David would probably correct me, and just saying it's values. Like, what do we see? I'm like, because you're talking to your uncles and your grandfathers, I'm like, their values are kind of in line with what you're pushing, or not pushing, but what you're doing, right? And so if we can find the value that the same values that we all have in what we want, maybe that can help, quote unquote, push that agenda, versus looking at it from, hey, these are the 50-year-olds, the 60-year-olds versus the 20-year-olds,
it's true. And I sort of think that in some ways, like, we're trying to kind of define the future of food and be like, oh, we're going to have to all eat this crazy new diet that's climate friendly. Like, what is that going to be? And I'm like, actually, my grandfather was eating that not that long ago. And they all lived like really healthy lives. And so it's kind of, maybe you're right, like finding that commonality, not trying to, I'm all for the disruptors and innovators. And that is kind of where I find a lot of hope. I also do think, do we really have to totally reinvent the wheel? Or
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Think about the fact that, probably not that long ago, people lived, well, my grandfather lived a very like healthy, long life. And I'm pretty sure he would have eaten a lot more sustainably than I have.
Yeah. All right. So Rosie put in here real quick. Earlier you talked about the 5 to 10% who are proactively wanting to understand impact, not just because policy. Do you see any trends here? And what makes these companies want to be proactive? For example, they know their own customers' priorities, prioritize sustainability. I'm wondering how we can get more businesses to act in advance of regulation.
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that are just some, again, kind of going back to that bell curve, there just will always be some companies who, because they see themselves as those kind of first actors, innovators, they're just naturally more inclined to be on the front foot of things. And then there are those that just, their way of operating is being on the back foot. But I do think this is also driven by a cycle, which we all have some role to play in, which is kind of consumer awareness and care, and, you know, our kind of values as society are the things that then shape our habits, which then influence businesses. And then once businesses do things, that is then what influences policy and, of course, people's voting and choices. So it is all this kind of complex web. And I do think that where, you know, there are so many roles for different organizations and people within that web, I think it's just where do you kind of target your energy. So it's not to say that influencing consumers is, that's a fantastic thing. And there's amazing organizations out there doing that kind of education work, etc. There are people going at it from the policy lens, there are people going at it from the business lens. You need all of those lenses and approaches, and they all they ultimately do hopefully work in a virtuous circle. But yeah, in terms of those kind of 5 to 10% of companies, I don't know. It's something maybe I'll give a bit more thought. I think my experiences, they just tend to be the companies who, if you look at across loads of different areas, they're just, they see themselves as, like, yeah, their brand value is we're kind of always ahead of the curve and we're just the first movers. I don't know if it's necessarily specific to sustainability or more just kind of how they, position themselves probably in that bigger spread. But yeah, I'll give it more thought, because if I crack the answer to that and there's a way to get on board earlier, I will definitely be doing that.
All right. So somebody else was listening to Chef Talk. So Bill Keese, hope I said that right. The discussion with Chef Monk was fascinating. There's also a restaurant in Hackney Wick. Silo is one of the world's first zero waste restaurants using closed loop cooking and natural farming with locally sourced unusual ingredients. Should chefs like Rasmus drive real change in how we eat compared to companies whose efforts are more focused on compliance?
Yeah, I think, I mean, given compliance at the moment is pretty limited, I do think that those, kind of going back to those innovators and disruptors like Chef Rasmus, I mean, those are the people who are really kind of showing what's possible. And I think, they're the ones who are actually kind of changing what's on the plate in the real world. And ultimately, through that kind of virtuous circle, I do think that comes back to influencing policy, because we can show what's possible and we can show that we can have a functioning and thriving economic system that is more sustainable. But we need the policymakers to see that, and that requires those early movers to show what's possible.
Well, and my friend Sarah just got back from the James Beard Foundation's Chefs for Policy Change, and really, like, it helped her like see things differently and how she can, as chefs, have impact on policy and regulation and things. So I'm really interested in seeing what comes of that from what she learned on that. And all right, one last thing from Andrea. Bilgis systems change requires many different actors working synergetically. So the answer is yes, but they need support. Yeah,
I'd agree with that. So I think back to the kind of virtuous circle I was trying to paint, if you just attack it from one lens or one angle, it doesn't work. You do ultimately need all of those things happening in synergy. So I think it's just about picking your lane, and like we're really focused on helping food businesses accelerate their journey to sustainability, and that's one part of it. But we very much welcome the full circle.
Yeah, we got lots of hearts over here on LinkedIn flying up in the air. Yay. Okay, so five rapid fire questions. What's one ingredient you'd love to see used more sustainably?
I would love to see more pulses on the menu. So I think pulses are kind of the wonder food. They're great for the soil. They're great for our health, very rich in protein. They're low impact. And at least in the UK, we actually have quite a good climate for growing them. So I would love to see more pulses on the menu.
Okay. If you could remove one sustainability buzzword from the industry, what would it be?
I would, and have always been trying to get rid of carbon neutral. I think it's such a misnomer that you can kind of have emissions and then just sort of magically take them out of the air and then have something which is totally, no impact. So I'm ready to see that one go.
Okay, perfect. What is your go-to meal when you want something comforting but climate friendly?
Yeah, so I have to be honest, I don't know whether when I go for comfort, I kind of immediately think about climate friendly. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But maybe it goes back to my pulses. I do feel like a good dal can be really comforting.
Oh, yeah.
They're creamy, they've got that homemade vibe. It can really sort of feel like food for the soul. And very climate friendly and delicious. So I think that would be
very delicious. Yes. Actually, I think I might go get some Indian food for dinner. Who inspires you the most in sustainability or hospitality space right now?
So I think I'd have to give this one out. I've been sort of saying this for the last 20 minutes, but I do think those small producers and innovators, like we've had such an amazing time working with small beer companies, wheat companies, coffee companies. They're really trying to show what's possible and do things differently. And that I find really inspiring.
Okay. Fantastic. And like with food, with you, I mean, you started small, right? You got this idea. Yes. And okay, my final question, and finish this sentence. Every meal should.
I think every meal should enable us to serve another meal in the future.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. That's very cool. And whether it be leftovers or what, right?
Yeah, we're all for leftovers. That's good.
Right. Exactly. Anya, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation. I have your website up here. You can find Anya on LinkedIn. Go to the linkedin.com and just look for all of that. And then the website for Foodsteps is foodsteps.earth. Is that right? Yep.
That is right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Tracy. It was really, really lovely to chat to you. And thank you everyone for the very, interesting questions.
Yeah, totally. Andrea, Rosie, and Bill Key. I think I said that right. So thank you for tuning in, and we appreciate it. Until next time, everybody stay safe and eat well.
Thank you so much. Bye.